So I do want to touch on horror movie, but I kind of am going a little all over the place, but
Sure.
in order as well. Big fan of yours.
Thank you, Lowell.
And yeah, you're one. I was gonna say you're one of the few authors who just always has my money, no matter like you want to put out a oral history on Bavarian folk songs, I'm gonna buy it.
Well, thank you.
And yeah, and there's, First Word on Horror is kind of touching on it, which we spoke about before, but there's kind of like this new renaissance of like horror fiction, and it's really surprising because it's also good. And not only is it also good, but like every author has their own voice. Like I know what a Paul Tremblay book is, what a Stephen Graham Jones book is, what Grady Hendrix, Rachel Harrison, CJ Lead, you know, all of them. And like I know, you from what I've gathered, you've gotten started as a writer a little bit later in life than like I guess what is ideal for someone just graduating college or
Yeah.
hitting the railroads like Bob Dylan, or at least like Bob Dylan imagines himself. Um, and but what is it like to sort of get acclaim later in life? Does it sort of affect the way that you view it? Do you cherish it more, or?
That's a great question. It's funny. And this will be related, I promise. I interviewed Stephen
Oh,
Graham Jones, who's a dear friend. And it's for like, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the publication. It's for like the Society of American Gothic Studies or something. So it's going to be like in a, sort of an academic journal. Hopefully there's some way that interview can be shared more widely because, Stephen is awesome. But, I sort of posed him the question, like, how is he dealing sort of with success right now? And we both sort of back and forth talked about like, whatever level of success we both have. Like, I know I never imagined it was going to, get to whatever level this is. And I know Steven feels the same way. And we both shared the ideas, like, we're kind of glad that it didn't happen too early for us. I can't imagine that pressure. I mean, um, in my case, I don't know, like so looking back, obviously at the time it sucked, but like, I took a bunch of lumps. Like, I mean, it took a while to get to a place where I felt like had a novel that was presentable. And my first two novels were these weird crime novels. And it wasn't like a planned pivot. Like my whole writer life, I had been writing horror short stories. And I just happened to have the idea for these weird, dark, humorous crime novels. So, I think like most people do when you sell to a big publisher as Henry Holt at the time, I assume it was like, oh, this is it. I made it, and I don't have to worry about anything. And it just everything that could go wrong went wrong. Like my editor left, even like the publisher left, the head publisher left somewhere else. Someone new came in, and it's never good for writers when new people come in because no one has actual stakes in whether or not your book is going to do well. Because if it doesn't do well, they can be like, hey, don't blame me. It was the other editor who bought this or the other publisher,
yeah.
and like
Movies.
yeah. So anyway, it didn't go well. And I spent 3 years, just being sort of angry and bitter about it, and then sort of was able to release those feelings and crawl my way out and write, A Head Full of Ghosts. So that was published when I was 44. Um, and then as overnight sensation, Paul
Yeah,
Tremblay,
just
at
44
44.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, that's a really long, rambly answer to say, no, I'm glad. I feel like I'm more able to sort of deal with it, you know, um, because I've had books tank and I've had editors and publishers drop me and small presses fold underneath me. And I've been to, many, literary festivals, both horror and not horror, and just seeing like how people react to people. So I don't know. It's a little bit easier to step back and just know, hey, what's happening now is really cool, but also know like it could fall apart at any time, but also be a little bit okay with it all. I mean, that's not to say I don't have frustrations and don't complain. I save those for when I talk to John Langan on the phone once a week. Poor John.
Yeah, I mean it is kind of nice that like you're sort of past the withering neuroses that a lot of younger writers get, you know.
I don't know if I'm past it, but there's less years of it to go.
Yeah, well,
If I was like 25 or 30, I'm like, oh my God, I've got at least like, 3 more decades of this where I'm like, if I can write for another 10 years, 10, 15 years, I'll be happy. Uh, I don't know.
well, we're definitely hoping you do. Um, and as I was saying before, like Your voice is so distinct, along with all these other people in the vanguard of the horror movement, new horror movement. It needs like a name, something like like Eli Roth and Rob Zombie and Alex Aja were part of the Splat Pack. Like we need some catchy thing. I'll
Yeah.
maybe come up with it, or
Yeah, I think that's for the journalists to come up with. Yeah, like it'd be really obnoxious if I came up with it. Although writers used to do that all the time. Like in the early 2000s, it was China Mieville and like Jeff Vanderveer and some of the other writers calling it the new weird, which was kind of cool. But yeah, no, it's better if it comes organically or from like the press. Yeah.
cool. I'll see what I can do. So, but your, like I said, I know what a Paul Tremblay book is when I pick it up, but your books cover many different subjects and horror subgenres. And I'm just wondering, is there some kind of like secret sauce or a way that you sort of put your voice in a zombie novel, a possession novel, a a cursed movie novel?
Um, Geez, I don't know. I mean, I think it's just, because, well, I mentioned earlier, like sort of like my long, slow climb to the point of where I am. Like I first started messing around with writing, in my early 20s, but it was very like, or mid 20s, I should say, but it was very much a hobby until like probably my early 30s. So I don't know. I just feel like I was really patient with myself. I tried to get things published and I always would only submit to paying markets. So I don't know. I think I still have some of that patience side of thing, which is getting harder and harder to do because, when you go online, you see everyone doing amazing things. It starts to make you freak out. Um, but yeah, so like, I don't know if there's definitely not a secret sauce. I think maybe whether it's my voice or if this is another writer doing it, for me, what's always worked is when I commit to a story, I commit to it because it it won't stop picking at me. Like, I don't have like I wish I did, like because I know my friend John Langen's got like all these different books that he could write, and it's just a matter of having the time to write it. And man, I go from book to book. I do not have I do not have a lineup of things waiting to be written. In a lot of ways it's super scary, but also it's just a function of like just how the writing part of my brain works. It's if it's a novel in particular, I just the idea won't leave me. And that's my test because I think everyone gets excited when you first get like a cool idea or a what if. But for me, the real test is to let it lie for a few weeks, sometimes even a few months. And a few months later, if it's still there, like insisting and keeping like throwing new images at me, that's when I know, okay, I'm I need to write this, and part of the fun is figuring out like why I had to write it. Um, so I've had a day job for all this time. So, I mean, that's the other fun part of it too, is like I haven't yet had to sustain myself or my share of the family, financially by what I'm writing. So, uh, I don't have to like come up with like new ideas every 3 months or 4 months. I think that would be really hard for me to do.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, the that actually reminds me, did you I hate the sound of my own voice, so you're just going to have to bear with me. Sorry, viewers. Uh,
No, you have a lovely voice.
oh, well, thank you. You and my ninth grade chorus teacher both agree. Uh, have you ever had an idea that you jumped at too quickly and like maybe like you didn't let it simmer and it just kind of you got to a point you're like, well, shit, I don't know how to finish this or where to go with this? Because I have definitely done that before.
Sure. Um, Frequently. It happened more often around the time of A Head Full of Ghosts and maybe like right after that. And actually trying to come up with the next book after A Head Full of Ghosts, I probably very loosely outlined almost like two or three other novels that I never ended up writing because I found out that, nah, it's not working for me. I wasn't interested in it. I think the most work I ever put into a novel somewhat recently. I mean, I'm not counting what happened like in the late 90s and early 2000s when, I did know what the hell I was doing. Like I still don't, but at least I can sort of fake it better. Uh, and it was actually the book that I stopped writing to write A Head Full of Ghosts. And in that case, I thought was I jumping the gun too early to quit this book that I've been working on for like a year to write the new shiny thing that was A Head Full of Ghosts. Um, so that book, it was going to be called, because this was like 2013 when I was about 100 pages into it, and I was calling it Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters, which is a great title or a
Honest,
good title. Yeah.
we'll cut this out so you could use it for something else.
No, I don't know if I'm ever going to use it. I've mentioned it before elsewhere, so it's out there. But it was about like sort of like this eighth grader who wanted to like destroy the world, but out of like in his mind, out of like kindness because the world was so awful. You know, he wanted to sort of euthanize everybody. So he was going to write letters to Manson, who at the time was still alive, you know, for advice kind of thing. Um, so like I thought, I mean, the problem with that was like, oh, the title is great, but like a title can only sustain you for so long. And so like I really got bogged down and didn't know where to go or what to do, and I wasn't super excited about it. And there was gonna be like the subplot of the kid's dad was like a frustrated writer, which I was very much at the time. So I think that had a lot of like my negative, bad sort of energy that I needed to get rid of, you know, before I could move on. And that's sort of what happened. The idea for Head Full of Ghosts hit me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I knew I had to do it. So it took a lot for me to put away this novel that I'd already been talking to my agent about, the Manson novel. I didn't tell him I quit it until I had like 100 pages of A Head Full of Ghosts later that summer. He was like, "Hey, how's the Manson novel going?" I'm like,
Hey,
"Well, I got this now."
that I'm gonna get paid on? Yeah, how's that coming along?
Yeah, there was no contract for that one. So yeah,
Nice. Wow. So how do you get your ideas? Just kidding. But
spit tea everywhere. Yeah.
I mean the discipline to be able to do that. I don't know if I'd have that, but that's really impressive. But you always kind of seem like the kind of person who challenges himself with like every book, uh, like every anthology. Like I remember I read Head Full of Ghosts and uh, oh my words, Cabin at the End of the World back to back, and then shortly after that I read Survivor Song. So it was like in pretty good
Mm,
succession. And you know, Head Full of Ghosts kind of seems it's not like a found footage book, but
mhm.
like it's got a very specific point of view, like a little girl's point of view in a larger situation. And there's a little bit of that in Cabin at the End of the World, which is in mostly like one location. And then
Right.
you go to Survivor Song, which is kind of real time. Like it's almost like an episode of 24. And I know you mentioned before that you sort of like take one thing like with you to the next book. Is it just like you think like, what if I did this instead? Let me like try it here because it seems like that's worked out pretty well for you.
Mhm.
And I just don't know if you're just really lucky or a really good writer.
Well, thank you. Probably lucky. I mean, for me, it's more like I'm looking for not shortcuts when I can, or a boost. Like I like the idea of a little bit of boost of something that worked. When I say it worked, like I was able to write it to completion and someone published it. You know, people. It's up for other people to decide like if it's successful or not. But in my mind, it's like, hey, this worked because it became a book. They liked it enough to publish it, and so like for me, it's always like the balancing act of I want the new thing to feel totally new, like I have never done it anything like this before, but at the same time, I want to take a little bit of that confidence and energy from knowing that hey, you've done this before, you can do it again. Yeah, so I just kind of like thinking of the books as hey, they're going to hand the baton over to the next one in some way. Uh, Again, like so much of it's just playing games. Like I think all writers do this. You play, subconscious games with yourself just to, make it feel new and fresh. I mean, because most days, like when I sit down and write, like I have to force myself to do it. I don't have fun writing. I know some writers do. I don't. I mean, there are some days where it is fun when it's going really well. Um, but what I'm addicted to is like having the complete thing. I'm so excited. Actually, I just listened to and I'm gonna try to think of it in terms of more this way. There's a KingCast episode where they interviewed Osgood Perkins.
Oh
Um,
yeah, the recent one.
yeah, I think writers would he had a lot of really good writing advice for writers of all types. And the one that sort of like stuck with me is like, oh yeah, it sounds so simple, but it's so true. It's like you can have good days and bad days, and you just sort of stack them up. So you move on to the next one. And it's just a good reminder to have, like because sometimes the bad days, feel like, oh my God, this is how it is all the time, when it's clearly not. It does tend to alternate. It's almost always for me, like I feel like I have a great day, I'm in a great mood, and the next day I was like, man, why why is this so sucky today? And yesterday was so great, but it's just it's a new thing,
It wasn't great, and it sucks too, and everything you
right?
expect. And that we're looking into my mind now
Uh,
a little bit. But yeah, no, I totally get that, and You got to just do, for me, you find you just got to do the vomit draft. Just get it. Sorry to say that while you're taking a sip of a drink. Get it out of you
Yeah.
and fix it later. Um, that's
Oh,
my,
I can't do that. That's I wish either I know most writers, and that's probably the best way to work for most people. I wish I could do that. I can't. I have to rework what I did the day before, and if it's a novel, I'm usually starting at the start of the chapter. And
mm,
I feel like I go very slowly forward because I'm always sort of adding what I had written to maybe like a few days prior. But eventually it starts slowly expanding. So typically when I add new stuff, it's really bare bones. And then when I go back over it for the next bunch of days, it starts to slowly expand. So yeah, I do. I don't know. I used to try to say that that was the math because I teach math, the math brain, like insisting that I have to work on it and work on it until I feel good, happy enough to move on. But I don't know. It's what works for me, so I'm sticking with it.
that works for you, works for all of us. Don't torture yourself too much. Remember, there's always math. Um,
This is true.
but I do want to talk about Survivor Song for a second because
Sure.
I really liked it. How's your sister, by the way? Because I know people who were nurses during that time.
Yeah.
It, has she been okay since? No.
Yeah. No, I mean, she definitely has some sort of level, lower level, I don't know, lower or at some level of like PTSD from the experience. And it's funny you mentioned that. And thank you for asking about her. Like, I was listening to a radio program today. Radio, I'm so old. Uh, one of my vices is I listen to local Boston sports radio when I exercise. That's how I shut my brain off, is just, I'm still a sports guy. That's how I like sort of take a break from everything. Anyway, well, they were mentioning, oh, it's the 5 year anniversary and like talking about how like, they all got it wrong, like, but they were trying their best. When they say they all got it wrong, it was because, everything shut down for so long. It was like, it's so insane to me, like how bad people's or how bad our social, our collective memory is, where, no, when this first happened, we shut down because the hospitals were going to be overrun. It has nothing to do whether, most people end up, surviving COVID. But, in April, there was no room for people in the New York City hospitals. There were no room in my sister's hospitals.
There were no
Anyway, just
ventilators.
so,
There were
yeah,
used.
and no ventilators, right. No, but she's still a nurse. Well, she doesn't do as much in the hospital as she used to. She does a lot of like phone call triage kind of stuff. But thank you for asking. Yeah, she's well.
Yeah, of course, I have a friend who's a resident at a New York City hospital. She loves horror. She's got a great sense of humor, but after going through what COVID did, she's like, I'm gonna stay away from like plague, zombie apocalypse.
Don't blame her. Yeah.
Yeah, but she's building herself up to read Survivor Song. But I wanted to ask about that because it's a great book. Everyone I know who's read it really likes it.
Thank
But
you.
I feel like when we talk about your work, it's like Paul Tremblay, author of Head Full of Ghosts and Cabin at the End of the World and horror movie, and we really like those. But in my head, I'm like, you got to put Survivor Song in there as one of those over the title names because I mean, it's fantastic. Like
Thank
how,
you.
yeah, like, and also I read it during the pandemic. And
Oh man, I'm sorry.
no, but no, really. But there
Yeah.
was a point where I was like, as I'm like sitting at home going through all this, I'm like, someday someone's going to make 2020 the movie. And I'm going to have to sit there in the movie theater when the trailer comes on and I'm just
Yeah.
going to look away and plug my ears because someone's going to do it. But here I was pre-vaccine in 2020 devouring this book. It gave me escapism and
Hmm.
I love it, but it's just really taught and well written. And I don't, maybe there are other books. I'm sure there have to be other books written in real time, but how did you prepare for that? Because that seemed like the most leveling up in terms of like an attempt of what you tried to do with your books. Like a full novel of just like
Yeah.
so hours.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I don't know if yeah, I mean, I didn't do any preparation for the real time part of it. I just sort of just threw myself in. It was like a very slow write for a long time. Like I wasn't getting my usual 500 words a day. It was probably more like 300. So it definitely felt, especially, with all the sort of action scenes that the book had, that takes me a long time. Like I really want to try to get the choreography correct and, hopefully make the sentences sound cool besides just like, oh, this person bit that person. I don't know. So those kind of scenes take me a lot longer to write than like say interiority or dialogue and things like that. So thank you. It was funny that book I wrote in a sort of like a forced white heat the summer of 2019 because it was due August 15th and like July and July and that first half of August I wrote probably more words in that shorter period of time than I ever had before. So I'm lucky and glad that it ended up working out for you anyway.
Yeah, no, it
uh,
definitely adds to the frenzy of it. Like, maybe that maybe that did help. I mean, not that you were under so much anguish and pressure, but worth it for me.
well, thanks. Yeah. Um, I mean, in some ways, like I found it freeing to be the real time thing because I had to worry less about like so many people. I had to worry less about plot, honestly. I mean, even though there's plenty of plot in the book, but it was more like I could just focus on what they were doing from moment to moment and let that carry and hope that there was obviously enough suspense happening that the opening conceit that Natalie was bitten by an infected human, she's pregnant, what's going to happen in 6 hours? So like even when there's like just her and her friend talking or other people talking, there's still that thing weighing over everybody, sort of the literal ticking clock, as much as I hate that phrase, there. So, I mean, hopefully, if it's suspenseful in any way that, that sort of helped it along.
Yeah. And it was it going to is it still in talks to be a movie or a series or something? Maybe you can't say anything
No,
about.
no, I can like it's been optioned. There was a screenplay, or still is, that's really good, and there was a really good director attached, but like things happen, and that director, so we've gone through two directors, but I just got like a text today from my agent and slash producer for the movie, and like all of a sudden there's this other exciting name, uh, and I think if she were to be involved, I think it would be perfect. So yeah, we'll see. So like just randomly, all of a sudden, I kind of thought it was dead in the water, but maybe there's a second or a third life. So yeah, we'll see.
Funny how that happens. I have a BFA in dramatic writing and I've worked on some film sets, so I'm not
Oh,
an insider or anything, but I'm well aware of how things can fall apart all at once. And then like 48 hours later, it's like, oh, we're good now. Yeah, like nothing happened. Uh,
right.
a fun little roller coaster. Um, so last time I grilled you a little bit about Bad Religion, but
Uh,
and maybe you're just going to say, well, the answer's in Pallbearers Club, stupid. But how did punk influence your life and your writing? I know you were in a band and you toured around New England. Was that right?
oh no, my doppelganger, Art Barber, the character, did some of that stuff. No, that was uh, sort of wish fulfillment, or maybe an alternate universe me. Um, but I started writing around the same time I was teaching myself how to play guitar. And some friends were showing me stuff too. And honestly, if I had my druthers, if I could go back in time, I would choose, punk musician over writer. But unfortunately, I found I was a better writer than musician. No, for me, the role of punk music and, indie and alternative, certainly 90s era, but I still try to stay, and I do stay somewhat up in sort of the modern punk slash, independent music scene as well. Um, music to me has always been, I mean, it was my first. Obviously, I love movies. I obviously love writing and reading books, but music to me was the first visceral thing that helped. I don't know, like so many the cliche, like the lonely high schooler music was your refuge, and it was definitely my refuge. Um, you know, you just, so many afternoons I would just come home, and my parents had a big old record player with giant speakers, and I would put them in a tent, like I would tent them against each other and lay with my head underneath. No wonder why my hearing isn't so great these days. Um, and that's sort of like where I first became comfortable with myself and first found like my first group of friends was through like the shared music thing. It's been fun as an adult that has changed now. It's become sort of this whole entire book universe. But I still have like, the shows and movie going or and music going friends. I don't know, and I still listen to my favorite music like I did almost embarrassingly so as a preteen and a teenager, where I
Oh,
imagine myself performing on stage performing my favorite songs that I like.
well,
Yeah.
who are your bands and who still are your bands?
Well, I mean, as a
Five. I mean, we'll be here all night, I'm sure. But
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, well, like in seventh grade, like, so I had no older siblings, child of MTV, cable 80s. So like Def Leppard's Pyromania was like the first time I became like a music nut. It was seventh grade. And I remember walking, there was a store in my town called the Record Rack, and they would sell pins. So I'd buy like Def Leppard pins. So toward the end of high school, like a Living Color became a huge deal. I remember Vivid was I wore that tape out. I had to buy multiple cassette tapes because I listened to Vivid so often. And I think that was my bridge into alternative punk music that I first heard when I was in college. Yeah, so that really exploded with, the band Husker Du, which I would still, say is my favorite. Bob and Husker Du as favorites. High up there for sure is Bad Religion, and a whole host of other bands. Bands that are current now. Future of the Left slash McCluskey is definitely a favorite, and I've been very fortunate to become very friendly with Andy Falkus, the lead singer, guitar player. There's a Boston band called Pile that I quote in the beginning of Horror Movie, who's probably like the newest to me band that I've uh, become a huge fan of. My daughter, which was fun, she was the first person to show me a song from Pile during the pandemic. So yeah, no, I still try to make sure I push myself to discover new music and not just rely on, all the old favorites.
yeah, it's really funny. Like I've been thinking about this a lot. Like like your gateway drugs, the music that you got into versus what you listen to now, and like what has stayed with you and what you stopped listening to and then went back to, or you stopped listening to it and you find yourself listening to their current stuff.
Mhm.
It's like it's weird. Like I
Yeah.
never thought I'd still be listening to Alkaline Trio like 20 something years later, but they're still one of my favorite bands, you know. Um, but yeah.
Yeah. No,
Um,
even Def Leppard, like the record before Pyromania, High and Dry. That's a good record. That's just a good like hard rock record. Not doesn't have the production flash that the later stuff has. So I still, that's as far back as I go. The seventh grade me is occasionally I'll listen to a little old High and Dry.
yeah, sometimes you need some, well, I guess they're not quite hair metal. They're kind of like an echelon above that, but yeah,
Yeah,
Van Halen still rules. Like,
sure.
you know, I um yeah, it's not all about punk, but you know.
Yeah.
So horror movie, your latest, which I told you we'd get to, or your pizza's free. Um, so I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm like a horror movie nut, physical media nut, all of that.
Nice.
But when I heard you were writing a book about a cursed horror movie, I'm like, well, yes, that's like most of my boxes. And I really enjoyed it. And as you can imagine, but I was just sort of fascinated with the writing process of it. Because like I said, I've written plays and screenplays, and
Mhm.
I was really interested to see like that, the mixing of the formats. And as a writer, are you sort of, how do you decide what information, aside from the flashbacks and like what happened in the making of the film, how do you decide what goes into the script versus what goes into the prose? Like, do you
Mm.
have trouble sort of differentiating those and parsing them out?
Um, yeah,
Have you,
that's a great question. I mean, I certainly spent like a lot of time thinking about it, and I got to write most of that book in the year sabbatical that I took off from teaching. Um, so that book, I think more than any of my other ones, got the most sort of like intensive focused writing time. All the other books I've written, I've been a teacher and working, so I've been, doing both. But horror movie had, geez, I would say I probably only written like a few, maybe five of the chapters, probably less by the time like I had all this time off. So I don't know, in a lot of ways that book feels to me like, in my head, it feels sort of like really tight. And um, I feel like it's one of the few books that I feel like I got enough time to work on the book. Or I had as much time as I wanted to work on the book. Whether that means it's good or not, I don't know. Um, But in terms of like how did I decide, I sort of let the draft lead me. Because anyway, I had a general plan, although I didn't outline it. I just sort of kept notes as I went. But I think what helped to finally answer, sorry, I'm so rambly. The question that you
oh no,
asked
that's what this is for.
was I didn't sit down and write the screenplay first. I had a general vague notion of what I wanted the movie to be. but the way it's presented in the book is the way is how I wrote it. I mean, that's dumb, but I mean, it's dumb to say. Uh, what I mean is it's in the order in which it is. Like the breaks in the script happened where and then the prose happened. So I would work on the script, it would stop, and that would help boost me into if it was a flashback or if it was present day. That was how I wrote it. Again, because I don't just spill it all out, I have to edit as I go. I think the only thing that happened between a full draft and turning in the draft was I moved one of the first, like there's three present day detective chapter or detective director chapters. I moved that one up a little bit. But otherwise, no, I found that part really fun to be able to take a break from the main text and work on this weird screenplay. And then, by the time I was finished with the little section, it felt like it was time to go back to to the main story. And I feel like that helped hopefully make it a little bit more seamless or make them sort of communicate with each other better.
I think they did. Well, I'm incredibly obsequious if you can't tell by now, but just, I was when I put it down, I was like, he did it again. And like many of your works, I always have to chew over the ending, as I'm sure you hear a lot, but it worked for me. And I was just in the Fangoria book club, and a few books ago, we chose horror movie,
Mm.
and we just had a fun time just like picking it apart. Um, do you, I mean, I imagine a part of you writes your books that a part of you writes hoping that the audience picks it apart because you're never really fully straightforward, and that's kind of the fun of reading you. Well, fun, but
Yeah.
like Head Full of Ghosts, I think was the first book I read where I was like, to me, there is no answer. I know you would want some people to find answers, but to me, this was like written as to like, here it is, figure it out in a way that I hadn't really read a book or seen a movie like that before. Like even when I watch Donnie Darko, I'm like, I'm gonna figure it out. Like, I'm eventually gonna get there. But I feel like you and a lot of stuff you write are like, here it is, let's go. Um, not maybe not so much Survivor Song, but definitely.
Yeah.
So you is that like fun for you? Like, do you get enjoyment as an artist, like making people lean in and look at your art? Is that like part of it?
Uh, yeah, I mean, honestly, it starts with I want to write I write the books I want to read. Uh, and I love books that make me work. That's not to say there aren't books that I've read that have totally gone over my head. There are millions of those books, but I attribute that's a me problem. That's not the book's problem. Um, I don't know. I mean, just the whole ambiguity thing is, once I figured out, it was clearly one of my obsessions. It was like, well, I might as well put it to use. But I kind of feel like that, with the novels, and it's kind of fun and weird to be in a place where I have like a whole bunch of novels at this point. Um, I mean, I feel like there's shades of ambiguity. Like, I don't think the Paul Bear's Club is all that ambiguous.
Yeah, that
Uh, but it's sort of presented as ambiguous. Um, but with the Head Full of Ghosts, like how you described is exactly how I thought of it. Like I divorced myself from thinking there is a true answer. Um, to me, if a head full of ghosts is scary, it's precisely because of the ambiguity that we just don't know, and that's frightening. I mean, I find it frightening. I think it sort of represents, life in the 21st century. I'm sure it's been in every century, but in the 21st century, we have obviously the internet and social media, and like we have all this information.
yeah.
Um, and like, how do we know what's what? So like, I imagine writing a head full of ghosts is like, oh, I'm going to withhold if something supernatural happening, but I'm not going to. I imagine it's like I'm not like hiding information. I'm giving you every possible piece of information. So the truth is buried under all this white noise. If there is a truth at all. I mean, maybe that's the other part of it. But to me, that that's different than horror movie, which certainly plays with ambiguity, but I've allowed myself to have an opinion. I think what happens at the end. Uh, where this head full of ghosts is like, no, like I can't tell you. Similar to The Cabinet at the End of the World. Like I've never thought 1 second beyond the last line of that book. Although after seeing the movie, I now have an opinion. But when I was writing it, I didn't have an opinion as to whether the world was actually ending or not.
No, I mean, and I can definitely tell with Head Full of Ghosts and Cabin at the End of the World, like And Cabin at the End of the World was another one where it's like, I'm gonna leave you without knowing. I'm just my writer's brain cannot fathom writing to an ending that you yourself aren't like. I mean, like even Doubt, you know that play, like John Patrick Shanley. Even with that,
Mm,
yeah, the author's like, I know the answer, but I'm not going to tell people. And I'm like, so
sure.
I'm watching it, I'm trying to parse it out. But I just think it's like you're a really strong writer to be able to do that and not piss people off. And I'm sure some
Oh,
people,
I definitely piss people off.
no, I know, but
Don't you worry.
um, we're almost done. But you brought it up, and I know a month doesn't go by where someone doesn't come up to you and goes, "Man, I'm really sorry what they did to your book." You know, I,
Yeah,
I personally on Front Street, I like the movie. It's not your book. I never expected it to be your book at all. And I
yeah,
know to say, I would imagine you have a very complicated relationship with it. Um, it's been 2 years since,
yeah,
and,
crazy.
and yeah, and let me just say, whatever you think of M. Night Shyamalan, he's a hell of a director. For me, he directs the shit out of everything, good or bad, that he does. And I'm just wondering, 2 years later, has your opinion on it changed at all?
Um, no, I probably haven't watched the movie in over, yeah, definitely over probably like a year and a half. Probably like the last time I watched the movie was for a podcast, and then John Lang and I were doing like an author track for the movie, which was a lot of fun to do. Um, gosh, where is that again? I forget. I'm sorry, I'm forgetting the name of this podcast. But anyway, I don't
Well,
know if my opinion has changed too much on it. I mean, I had a lot of time to prepare mentally for like the story changes. I mean, Knight was very, I appreciated that he was very honest. It was May of 20, no, it was May of 21. No, sorry, November of 21 when I had a phone call with him when it was, he just cast Dave Bautista and told me sort of, big picture what he was going to change. So, I had plenty of time to prepare for that part of it. Um, still, I'm not gonna lie, it was difficult just because that story means so much to me. And that's silly to say, like every novel I've written means a lot to me. But there are other books that I've written, I'd be like, take it and go nuts. Like I wouldn't bother me a bit. And it's not like a reflection of like I don't like that book as much. It's just I don't know. Cabin was a really personal thing that is honoring like friends and family members with some of the characters, and also at the same time like the horror at the core of that book was really personal to me. One of the fears being, what if there's a god and that god is the raging jerk from the Old Testament? That's a fear. And so the hardest thing for me was to have the movie version of it be sort of not only lean into that, but like it's a good thing. It's for Knight and some other people, like that's a more hopeful ending to them, which to me is like,
is when you leave the theater, but if you think about it for a few minutes, it's like it's kind of darker.
oh, it's way darker. Yeah, I was totally bummed out. Not because of what happened in my book, but the story. Like, man, there are these, the dad and Wen, like, not only do they have to live with, that they let, their loved one, kill themselves. They have to live with the knowledge that this really capricious, cruel God of the universe, like, just killed thousands of people, you
Yeah.
know, for
And
what? Like willy-nilly.
around
Yeah,
knowing that like because he killed his the love of his life,
yeah,
everyone else around him gets to live, including maybe people who use gay slurs to him in public. Like, yeah,
yeah,
but
yeah.
I mean, I don't mean to bring up the
No,
death.
no, no. I don't get people coming up to me very often, so that part of it, which is fine. Yeah,
Okay. To me, I look at it like Fight Club, sort of, where the ending to the book is perfect for Fight Club. The ending to the film is perfect for the movie. The ending of your book is perfect. The ending of the movie is fine because I never, and I'll tell you this, and hopefully I don't piss you off, but I was talking to my wife. I showed her the movie. My wife, I mentioned last time, she
yeah.
loves Head Full of Ghosts, hates Unsolved Mysteries, but loves Head Full of.
Hmm.
And we watched the movie, and then afterwards she asked me how the book ends. And I told her. even though I have it on my shelf. I should have given
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
to it. And she thought about it. And she's an English teacher, and she's like, "That makes sense." And I'm like, "Really?" And she's like, "Yeah, if you don't kill this character,
Right.
which I never thought they were ever going to do. Like that was just I never thought that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Then one of the two has to die, or else love isn't real. Like, and I'm like, that's kind of a magnanimous like thought. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, and
I will,
maybe
yeah. So I will say though, like, I mean, I don't know how much, I don't want to like
I know my
I
wife
don't
is
want to like break down the
yeah,
conversation you guys had. No, but like if you see the movie and you're like, oh, this is the ending, but like the other big difference is in the movie, it's clearly an apocalypse happening with
yes.
hundreds of planes dropping. Whereas in the book, at
Oh,
least I
that's
tried to make it more like, I mean, that visual is hard to get rid of. Like if you watch the movie, it's like, oh no, this is happening. If you read the book, it's not as clear. And I always enjoy when I have people who read it and say, oh no, there was no apocalypse happening. My first reader, uh, my cousin Michael, who partly who the book was inspired by some of the characters. He's like, no, there's no apocalypse happening. Because there's only like five planes dropping, and they're in every in the lineup with. Anyway, I feel like I gave a much more
not
rational explanation as to how these things could be happening, as opposed to the movie, where at some point it's just like, no, all this, it's happening. So I think that would change sort of her anyone's view on whether or not the apocalypse is happening. you know, I would say, a critique of the movie, like if it's going to be his story and it's going to sort of become this weird Christian dark tale, the only thing that maybe bothers me a little bit now that I've had more time to think about it, it bothered me in the moment too. And this is going to sound weird because I'm not usually like, I don't like gory movies generally. That's not like a moral objection. It's just that gore really upsets me. But I think it's a big mistake that they don't show more violence in the movie. I feel like it's sort of like being whitewashed because the role of like the reason why in the book I went to such gnarly detail, um,
it made
with each of the kills is to remind the reader every time, it's like, this is what you're asking of this family to do. This horrible, disgusting, violent act. You are, this supposed God or this group of people, this is what they're being asked to do. And in the movie, when you don't show any of that, it just makes it easier to be like, oh, I'm going to go off screen, shoot myself, save everybody. There's no blood. There's no, what's the value of the sacrifice, things like that. So yeah, uh, no, I enjoy talking about the differences between the movie and the book, frankly, but at the same time, it is weird that the vast, vast, vast majority of people who know the story at all will know the movie, which is a little weird. Because it is kind of different, or not kind of. To me, like the souls of the stories are so different. And really, the biggest frustration was sort of the marketing strategy and campaign leading up to the movie. Everything else, I'm fine,
what did
etc.
you
Solves
say
to have.
based on a Paul Tremblay book or and changing the title?
Yeah, no, well, I mean, it was more just like
Oh,
all the posters and the trailers leading up to it,
mhm.
had no reference to the book, even though they had references to like the screenplay and stuff like that.
Gotcha. I don't want to get you in any trouble. And
Nah, it's all stuff I've said before, so
okay, fuck 'em. Definitively, the book is better than the book. And I have friends who are like, that fucking movie, but like,
yeah. And also, I just another opportunity just to say, like, my visit to the set was amazing.
yeah,
Um, all you could tell, all the actors and all the people there really loved working with Knight. He had a very positive set, which is really cool to see. Especially when you hear all these horror stories about directors being sort of monsters on set. Like you can tell, like people continue to work with him over and over and over again. That's not just actors, but the script supervisor and the other people in and around Philadelphia. It was a very positive, fun place to be. Like never even came close to raising his voice once. He was very very cordial, very friendly. So I mean, all that stuff is really cool.
I can't imagine him yelling. Uh, but uh, before we wrap up, um, I don't know how much of this you can talk about, but just the idea of Osgood Perkins doing Head Full of Ghosts just kind of makes me salivate. And it's not happening anymore.
Yeah.
I believe there are other director or directors attached, but
Mhm.
would you be able to share anything about his version that maybe we wouldn't see in the new version, or just anything?
Yeah. Um, it's been so long since I read his screenplay. Uh, but like I say, it's so different from the book story wise, um, which is fine. Uh, and when I read the screenplay, I told the producers like, wow, this is. I mean, they're so different, but the emotional core is there, so I kind of feel like that they were siblings. So I really liked it. And the one thing that actually really blew me away is like, wow, Osgood's a beautiful writer. Like, it was a genuine pleasure to read on a sentence level a screenplay, which is probably not something people say for every screenplay.
No, but
Uh,
it counts.
yeah.
Yeah.
No, a beautiful writer. It would have been a really strange, interesting, and very Osgood sort of personal movie. And it sort of fell apart in early 2020. Um, just some of it was just bad luck. Like new financiers came on board, who turned out to be not very awesome. Uh, People can look that up later if they want, because those probably said somewhere on the internet like what the actual uh, company was, because they didn't pay me. They owed me like when 2020 hit, like they were supposed to pay me an option. It was like June or July, and they just ghosted, didn't pay. And to the credit of my producers, they stepped up and out of their own pockets paid, paid my option.
That's a good producer.
Yeah, no, so that's Allegiance Theater and Team Downey. They've been the producers with it since 2015. So, um, boo to that studio, yay to those producers.
And real quick, I have a little strange relation to Head Full of Ghosts. I was driving, it had just come out. I was driving to an Airbnb with my wife, or no, it was out in paperback. And I was driving, we were listening to a podcast. I don't know if you were a guest on it, but everyone was talking about Head Full of Ghosts, one of the best new books, like horror books ever. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of nice. And we get to the Airbnb, and one on the host bookshelf is a paperback of Head Full of Ghosts.
Really? Wow.
It just said out of nowhere, fine. And my wife's like, what? I'm like, don't worry about it. But then, like,
Yeah.
I bought it and it was all good. But it's just a funny story.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah. No, like it's funny. I think everyone would like most writers probably dream of being the book that's everywhere, but at the same time, it's like, oh, I don't want to be the book that annoys people.
No, it doesn't
Like,
annoy me.
because oh no, but it's just like, oh, you're hearing about it. It's like fine. Like that's
It,
cool. Well, I'm glad it worked for you, despite your being sick of seeing it everywhere.
no, I was not sick at all. If
Yeah,
anything,
yeah.
proof of divinity pointing me in the right.
Uh
One more quick question for
yeah,
you.
yeah.
I have dinner. I'm not sure if you can answer this, but you or are allowed to, but since you take things from previous books into your next books, you sort of take those elements. Can you talk about maybe or hint at what you're taking from horror movie into your next book, or have you just not
Yeah.
yet?
No, I can.
Okay.
So I don't know, in a weird way, like the three books that I've written, like let me backtrack to a Head Full of Ghosts, Disappearance of Devil's Rock, and The Cabinet at the End of the World. I felt like those three books had a lot of thematics in common. There was ambiguous supernatural elements. They all featured families sort of in distress, extreme distress. And so to me, that felt like a three book, not a trilogy, but an arc. And I kind of feel similarly with the Paul Bear's Club horror movie, and now this adult novel that I'm working on. All three books feature a very tall, uh, thin-ish character who's in his, early 50s, but in increasingly strange ways. Like obviously the thin kid, or the older thin kid, um, and then in this book, this tall, thin man he's not the well, I mean, he sort of is the star, but he has like no lines of dialogue, sort of,
Like the
but
kid.
not in a thin kid way. So anyway, yeah. So I'm using another. Grady Hendrix gets mad at me. Like he's like, when are you ever gonna put like a short, stout person in your book? It's all tall, thin people. Sorry, Grady. Maybe the next one. You have to wait. Although the main character here is a woman who's only like 5'2". So there you go.
It's so funny how you guys all like talk to each other, and I just hear things, not like gossip, but I was
Yeah.
talking to Clay McLeod Chapman, and like I've interviewed him a few times, but we were talking about like ambiguity and what kind of mother, and you came up, and he was like, "God, Paul's just sadistic." And I'm like, it's so funny. You're all catty in the best way. I love it. Uh,
Yes.
yeah. So. That's all I got for you.